Hey, everybody. Nate Dotson with the Riverfront here. A little disclaimer before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. We're going to be discussing the life and career of Pete Rose, and it's impossible to overlook that he was, without question, one of the most polarizing figures in sports history. People say it's complicated. I disagree. I think it's pretty simple, really. Pete Rose, the baseball player, was magnificent. Yet Pete Rose, the human being, was oftentimes despicable. While he had an undeniable impact on the game of baseball in the city of Cincinnati, his off field behavior and personal conduct was, well, abhorrent. Pete's actions outside of baseball, from his involvement in gambling to a disgusting relationship with a minor, tax evasion, and Lord knows there were no doubt other things, are very much part of his story, and they have led many to rightfully form strong opinions about him as a person. His off field mistakes are, quite frankly, just housed in a far darker place than I care to take this episode. Additionally, people far more eloquent, intelligent, and qualified than myself have written and talked at length about Pete and will continue to do so. I encourage you to seek out that content. That being said, for the sake of this episode, we'll be focusing on Pete Rose, the baseball player. His contributions to the Cincinnati Reds and the game as a whole are what brought him to the center. So many conversations about greatness and shine the spotlight on the city of Cincinnati that simply would not and could not have happened otherwise. Whether you think that's a good thing or not, well, that's entirely up to you. I fully understand, appreciate, and respect that everyone is entitled to their own feelings about Pete's legacy, and some may find it difficult to separate the man from the baseball player. And it's with that understanding that I hope you will listen to this episode and know that we're here today to discuss the impact he made between the lines. Thank you, and let's get started. Hello and welcome everyone to the Riverfront Cincinnati Reds show, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Nate Dotson. You're familiar with me, and I apologize for that. It's a tough life for y'all. I'm here expecting somebody worth their salt to talk about the Reds, and you get me. My bad, guys. But joining me to hopefully make it a little bit better on you. Familiar face, the guy we know and love, the Pop Father himself, Bill Lack. Mr. Bill, how are you?
Good.
Thank you for joining. And joining us once again, my man Branch Brown. Branch, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Good. Glad to be here.
Heck yeah. Well, let's get right into it, guys. Pete Rose, Reg legend, embattled legend, passed away. I think this was on Monday. He was 83 years old. We can talk about the accolades for a minute. He was a 17-time All-Star. As the MLB leader in hits, we all know him as the hit king with 4,256. He's the MLB leader in games played, at bats, and singles. Won 3 World Series titles and outs. Fair enough. 2 of those World Series with the Reds, 1 with the Phillies. 3 batting titles, 1 MVP, 2 Gold Gloves, an NL Rookie of the Year award, a 75 World Series MVP. And in 1999, he was named to the Major League Baseball All-Century team. So, Bill, as the person that I would say got to see Pete Rose play the most, you know what? You take a minute and just tell us how you felt when you saw the news that he had passed.
Well, I wanted to add some things to what you had. The 2
Please.
Gold Gloves, he won one playing right field. One of them was at Crosley Field when he had to deal with the terrace. He had 200 hits 10 times in his major league career. He was an all-star at 5 different positions. I read, and I went back and tried to find the tweet, and then I meant to look this up today, and I didn't look it up. I thought I read where he played over 500 games at 5 different positions. Think about it.
It was something like that. Yeah,
it's a crazy number.
X amount of bats. I couldn't believe it, and I can't imagine a player doing that.
Between the ages of 32 and 41, he missed 4 games.
Jeez.
Career batting average 303. The 44-game hitting streak, 17 times All-Star, 3-time batting title, and one of those was in '68, the year of the pitcher.
Mm-hmm.
And he hit 335 in the year of the pitcher.
That's about 100 points over league average.
Yeah. The league ERA, or the National League league average ERA that year was 2.98, and there were, what did I say here? 26 starting pitchers with an ERA under 3.
Jeez.
So much so they lowered the mound.
Right, that's right. They lowered the mound the next year. He played 162 games 10 times. He played 150 games plus 17 times.
That's just a wild number.
I mean, my favorite Pete Rose quote is, "I'd walk through hell in a gasoline suit to play baseball." The other one I like is, "Somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose, and I believe in letting the other guy lose."
He was everything you could want in a baseball player. How did the news hit you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, people rightly equate Pete to the Big Red Machine era, and from the time he became Rookie of the Year through his time in Cincinnati, he was the Cincinnati Reds.
Mm-hmm.
Bench came up. When Bench exploded in '70, he kind of pulled Rose back towards him, but I don't think he ever eclipsed Pete. They were kind of the yin and the yang.
Mm-hmm.
They were different people, and they different. And you either were a Pete Rose guy or a Johnny Bench guy. I mean, you could like the other guy, but one or the other was your favorite.
Yeah, you might be able to argue that Johnny Bench sort of surpassed him on like a national celebrity level, but never in Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know that I would agree with the national celebrity level.
Mm-hmm.
But people don't remember the first two batting titles he won. We just talked about the one when he hit 335 in the year of the pitcher, and he had to go 6 for 9 in the last week. I think it was the last weekend of the season to beat out Matty Alou. The next year, he hit 348, tied his career high in home runs with 16, hit his highest career slugging percentage at 512, career high in OPS, a career high in on base percentage. I'm sorry, 432, and he beat out Clemente 348 to 345.
That guy was pretty good.
Anytime you beat out Clemente, you had a good year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those are I just wanted to throw some more other numbers out there about Pete, because there's so many that you can kind of drown in them.
Things that'll just never be replicated. We'll never see.
It's kind of like if you go back and you look at Stan Musial's numbers in St. Louis, they're mind-boggling. If you're not acquainted with him. I've told my Pete Rose stories on here a number of times. My grandparents managed an apartment complex on the west side of Cincinnati that Pete and Jim Maloney lived there, and Darren Johnson and Don Pavletic and Art Shamsky. So I can remember watching home movies in Pete's apartment. It must have been like 65, 66, something like that. I was, 7 or 8 years old. He used to ask my grandpa, he'd stop in my grandpa's apartment every night on the way to the ballpark. Say, "Larry, you want to go to ballpark?"
That's so cool.
If you are of a certain age and grew up in Cincinnati, and especially if you grew up on the west side of town like I did, where I went to Western Hills High School, Pete Rose was the Cincinnati Reds. I mean, he was the man. And everybody that lived, that's my age on that side of town, a lot of my friends this week have been posting stuff on Facebook, Pete Rose stories. Everybody has some connection to Pete Rose. Mine is my senior year. Other than this thing I just talked about, my senior year at West High, he came up. They were dedicating the little road next to the high school to Pete. They were naming it after Pete Rose Drive, and he came up at lunchtime, and he was sitting in the lunchroom. And I can remember sitting at the table with him. I wasn't one of the people that interviewed him, but I can remember sitting there. Another guy that I knew from West High was Pete's kid's bodyguard in the late 70s. I don't know if it was really bodyguard or babysitter, but they called him a bodyguard.
Bodyguard sounds cooler.
You could be going to Gold Circle, which was like the local Kmart, and you could see Carolyn drive in the Rolls Royce. Or later, you could see Carolyn bartending at the Wagon Wheel at the corner of Race Road and Glenway. One of the kids I went to high school with was a bat boy on the Big Red Machine. Everybody but I know so many people that have some kind of Pete Rose connection. And if you grew up and you're around my age, you wanted to be, when you played ball, you wanted to be Pete Rose. Kids fought over number 14, wanted to play like Pete, especially people like me that didn't have a whole lot of talent.
Bingo.
Because and it's been often said, Pete didn't accomplish all he accomplished on talent. He accomplished it on grit, drive, and determination. So that's really all I have to say about Pete and growing up. I was down at the ballpark when he came back in, what was it, 84, I guess, when he came back to manage. I was down there that night. There were 16 of us sitting in the green seats in center field. It's the loudest ballpark I have ever been in my life. And I was there in 1990 when they clinched to go to the World Series. It was louder than that. To this day, even with all of the baggage, when Major League Baseball or the Cincinnati Reds want to draw a big crowd, what did they do? They involved Pete Rose. All-century team. When they honored the grade 8, when they retired Pete's number in Cincinnati, huge crowds, and the people went crazy.
Yeah.
So all the baggage things, I understand it all, and I don't want to we're not going to get into that, but it has not really affected his popularity in Cincinnati.
Yeah, it's hard to think of another athlete that was truly embraced by their city and embraced their city right back. The way that Pete did in his relationship with Cincinnati. Branch, what was your relationship with Pete growing up?
He was baseball. He's what I missed. I was born, but I was too young to know what was going on during the BRM days. I was born in 74. So, we had, my parents, of course, big BRM fans and all that. So, you get to 1981, 82, and I start playing T-ball. At that moment, I remember being told that I hustled like Pete in T-ball. And like my dad being like so proud. He's like, keep that up and you'll be a ball player. But play like Pete. And then as I progressed on to playing, even with bench, and I got moved to catcher pretty early on in baseball and spent a lot of years behind the plate. I loved bench, but I wanted to play like Pete. I wanted to play that hard all the time. For people my age, Pete was already larger than life when we started getting into baseball. He was baseball. He was, I hate to say it, but he was Jordan before Jordan was Jordan nationally. I'm down here in West Virginia, and Pete was everywhere. Pete was on the Wheaties box. Pete was on this commercial. Pete was everywhere. And if, like with every, that I've chosen to, that's how I'm going to remember Pete, is as a 10-year-old kid that's fallen in love with baseball, and you're hearing Pete Rose stories and you're being told to emulate him. And he's still going out there and doing it at this time. When I was 10, he hadn't broke the record yet. He didn't do that till I was 11. And, that was family time. We're coming up on that record. The living room was packed. That's me, my dad, my brother, my mom, aunts, uncles. You're all there. And it was, so there was no way I couldn't put this man on a pedestal, And that I eventually get yelled at for probably diving head first a little too hard from time to time, And one of the biggest things that I always took away from Pete was once I started catching and I had to back up first base. and the whole, taking a walk and sprinting down to first base and whatnot, but backing up first base on a single. I had a coach tell me, he said, if Pete was a catcher, he would have outrun every single runner down to first base on routine outs. And I always made it a goal of mine to make sure that I beat them coming out of the box. I didn't always do it, but I tried. And it's stuff like that I mean, I got to give the man credit. I've never met him. He wasn't in my neighborhood. I didn't know him, but the influence that he had in my life was huge and undeniable. So, when I found out about it, I was actually on the porch with my sons. We were out there talking movies or something. I think we were actually talking good anime series, and my sons were like, "Oh, you really got to watch Castlevania," but my wife had seen it come up on Facebook, and she come out and she said, "Hey, have you been online at all in the last bit?" And I'm like, "Nah, it's been an hour or two since the boys are both here." And she told me, and even my sons, which they have a totally different view of Pete, they were like, "Dad, are you all right? Are you okay?" And not everybody's going to understand that. They don't have to.
Right.
But he was my first hero other than my dad. So he was.
I think the perfect example of the way Pete Rose played baseball is the last play of the 1970 All-Star game. Game didn't mean anything.
Nothing.
But Pete Rose would rather win than lose. And Ray Fosse was blocking the plate.
And he did go. Ray Fosse played the games after that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of
it's been blown up.
Bad folklore. He had all-star seasons after that.
Yeah, it didn't end his career.
No. A couple.
And as a catcher, if you don't take it head on, come on, man. That's when you got to man up. Somebody's coming in like that.
Hey, Nate,
you got to know what's coming when Pete rounds.
You got to know what's coming, and you got a mitt
right.
in your hand. You got a mitt to protect you.
I read something yesterday where it said Pete was quoted one time as saying they didn't know it turned into two-hand touch between the time he went around third base and got to plate or something like that.
That's the quote I was trying to remember. Yeah.
I got a couple other numbers here that I jotted down. Pete's postseason averaged 321, 388, 440 in the postseason.
Jeez.
In 67 games.
67 postseason games is a pretty crazy number, too.
Top 10 MVP votes 10 times. Got MVP votes 15 times. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, a lot of this has to do with longevity, the length of time that he played.
Showing up's a skill.
Well,
our guys over at
being productive is a skill.
Yeah.
And Pete was productive for a very long time.
Our friends over at Locked On Reds brought this up, and they do often that if you ask Joey Votto what his favorite statistic was, he'd often say games played. Yeah. And you'd be crazy if you think that him and Pete Rose didn't talk a whole lot of baseball together.
Yeah. Have you seen the clip of him talk on MLB with Frank Thomas and A-Rod?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can tell that they are enthralled watching Pete Rose talk about hitting.
If anybody has 6 minutes, go YouTube that clip. It is.
Yeah.
It's really impressive. Great.
Yeah. So like this longevity, this generational thing is so important to the Pete Rose legacy, or at least the Pete Rose story. I am a Reds fan from Southwestern Virginia because despite Cincinnati being the closest baseball team to us, it's still a 4-hour drive away.
Yeah.
But my older brother was a Reds fan. His dad was a Reds fan. And his dad was a Reds fan. And if you think that our grandfather wasn't a Reds fan, or his Reds fandom wasn't influenced by Pete Rose, being from Appalachia, Branch, the most blue collar this blue collar gets.
Yep.
You guys get a lot
They
more
love that
kudos
guy.
than I do because I'm just a local guy that, and it's funny because my grandpa is really who got me, who took me to baseball games. My dad was my dad was working 2 jobs and he but my grandpa had, I forget what they called it. It was some kind of scout. And my grandmother's brother was the head scout for the Mets. In fact, he signed Tom Seaver to his first contract. And so my grandpa had this card, Bird Dog Scout. That was what it was called. And you could get into the ball game free all the time. So he used to take me to ball games down at, and I can remember very clearly going to Crossley Field. So, and then as I got older, especially once I started driving, me and my buddies, we could figure out in 15 minutes we wanted to go to the ball game. We could be at the ballpark in 20 minutes from where we lived and parked and in the stadium on a good night. So, you guys get a lot more kudos for being Reds fans than I do because I'm just a local boy.
You got to see a lot more games than we did. I remember it being a big deal if Dad was willing to skip church and drive up to Cincinnati for a day game. That's an 8-hour round trip. But yeah, it's always going to be a complicated, I won't say complicated, but a somewhat difficult conversation with Pete because he could do no wrong to one generation. The next generation, he could do no wrong up until their later years, and he got a little older and you found out. And then you have another generation that never got to see him, weren't listening to the stories on the grandparents' knee, and only know what has come to light over these last several years. And I have a hard time thinking of an athlete, such a roller coaster of a legacy that impacted so many people in so many different ways, but yet is still so important to the city that he called home.
I think that to generations younger than I am, I can understand where Pete was a distraction to them. That's all they've ever known him as. They didn't know him as I knew him as a hero. Mm-hmm. They didn't know him as Bill knew him as, holy cow, those teams were amazing, and he was doing stuff that people just didn't do. And I can see where you got tired of hearing about him. But He was that loved, and there ain't nothing. It is what it is.
I think there are many people, and I can separate Pete Rose, the baseball player, from Pete Rose, the person, and I have no problem doing that. I respect Pete Rose, the baseball player. He's everything I would have ever wanted in a guy if I had somebody playing for me. When I coached, those are the kinds of kids I loved. Mm-hmm. And the kid that had a lot of talent, it was easy for him. Yeah. But the kid that was like me, that didn't have a whole lot of talent, that was out there on grit and taking balls off his face and blocking with every part of his body. Those are the kids I love to coach.
You sound a lot like David Bell.
We don't have to be insulting here. But one of the quotes that I've read multiple times, I think Bench said it just this week, and then I saw an old clip with Joe Morgan. Pete made everybody that played around him better. And you can't ask more than that out of a ball player. But there's also, I've never seen a more self-destructive person in the history of my life, in anything. He couldn't get out. He couldn't stay out of his own way.
He was truly his own worst enemy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But
and a lot of that is why a lot of people have such strongly negative opinions about him. Completely justified. I'm not trying to argue they're not. Is that for someone that brought so much attention to a city like Cincinnati, which isn't LA, it's not New York, it's not Chicago, it's our own little slice of the pie. For him to then bring shine such a negative light on it has rubbed them the wrong way. And I won't begrudge them for feeling that way.
Yeah.
But if you're able to separate the two.
Well, and I've always thought that through this whole thing with the Hall of Fame, that's where I thought I've gotten very angry at Major League Baseball. Mm-hmm. Because they weren't willing to separate Pete Rose, the manager career, from Pete Rose, the player career. And I've always felt that should have been. It should have been two different things. And if they wanted to put a disclaimer at the bottom of his plaque or whatever, I wouldn't have had a problem with that. My guess is Pete wouldn't have had a problem with that. But I don't want to get off on that tangent. But I never thought that the negative stuff that came out about Pete later reflected badly on the city. And I always felt like people, when he was a player, when he was Pete Rose, people all across the country hated Pete. Every team hated, every fan in every other city hated Pete Rose. But man, would they like to have him. Mm-hmm. He'd have been the number one player on their team, but boy, if he was on your team, they didn't like him. I can remember the fight in '73 with Harrelson, and where they had to
Bud Harrelson.
Yeah, when they had to send Rusty Staub and Seaver and Willie Mays out to left field to get them to quit throwing shit at Pete, because Sparky had pulled the Reds off the field. He was going home. The same thing happened when Pete was manager. When Pallone, when he had the thing with Dave Pallone, where he got suspended for 30 days. And Marty and Joe got called to the commissioner's office for incitement, and people, even in Cincinnati, and that doesn't happen very often in Cincinnati, where people throw stuff out of the stands. But that night, Dave Pallone got pelted, the umpire. But I never thought that the negative stuff, the taxes stuff, the betting stuff, I never thought that reflected badly on the city. Now maybe it's because I'm from here. And I'm jaded. That's possible too. But
I would imagine that it would come from just an assumption that on a national level that people might, when they think of Cincinnati, they think of Pete Rose, and then they think of the bad stuff.
It could be. But
for me, not being from there, Cincinnati has always been this magical place. Driving around the interstate, you turn the corner, and the city comes into view from behind the mountain. Forever be one of my favorite things.
Yeah, when you come through the cut in the hill.
Yeah, it's one of those.
I'm going to Cincinnati on Friday, and I'm so excited.
So we don't see it that way, but did y'all see Chris Welsh's posts?
Yes, on Twitter.
Yes. Yeah, he has a lot of people were sharing their Pete stories online. It was pretty incredible. But I wanted to read the one that the last one that Chris Welsh posted.
Is this the Bill Burgess one?
Yes.
Chris has told that story on our podcast.
Really?
Oh yeah, he's in one of the interviews that we did, and I don't know which one it was because Chris has been so kind to us over the years and been on so many times. But at one of those, he told that story. He don't run this team. I run.
Chris stopped coming on the podcast once I showed up. I don't know what I did, but
talk to your brother. Your brother's been talking to him.
Yeah. So for those that didn't see it or haven't heard it already, Chris Welsh said he never would have been a Reds announcer if not for Pete Rose. He says 1986, and the owners were colluding not to sign free agents, even release players like Chris. So he was turned down by everyone, including the Reds. He said the day before pitchers report, he goes to where Pete is taping a commercial. Pete said, Chris,
if I remember right, this was in Tampa. I think Chris said this was in Tampa.
Yeah. He said, Chris, great to see you. Who are you going to be with this year? I said, didn't you hear? I'm with the Reds. Pete said, great. And he replied, I'm just kidding, Pete. I spoke with Bill Burgess, and he wanted nothing to do with me. Said, Pete looked me in the eye and replied, that SOB doesn't run this ball club. I do. You come down to Al Lopez Field tomorrow at 8 a.m., and I'll have a uniform with your name on it in the locker. Well, says, I thought, damn, Burgess is going to hate me, but I got Pete Rose on my side. I like my chances. And that's how I signed with the Reds.
And if I remember right, Chris didn't make the team out of spring training. It came down to the last cut, and it was him or Mario Soto, and so they thought Soto was going to go on the DL. Now I think this is the same year, and Soto ended up not going on the DL, and Chris had to go get his bag off the truck because he was going to Indianapolis. I think it's the same year. That's another story Chris has told on the podcast.
Yeah, getting to see that outpouring of support from Johnny Bench. Listen to Eduardo Perez, who's really, really close with Pete Rose Jr. getting
That
emotional.
was emotional. That clip
Yeah.
with Eduardo Perez was emotional.
I listen to Eduardo pretty much every day on satellite radio, the MLB Network, and he's a heck of a dude, and he always tells these little Pete stories all the time. But, you know, him and you know, P. Rose Jr. pretty much grew up together. You know?
Yeah. Did you have trouble with the bench comments?
I did not.
I didn't have any trouble with them. I thought they were all right. Tell us how you're feeling, though.
I don't know how I'm feeling. I know that I felt like Johnny in the last few years has gone out of his way to not talk about Pete. And it's gone as far as to say that's not why we're here or whatever else. And maybe he just got tired of the question. But to the average person, I would think it would give the appearance that he and Pete, and there was always stories that they didn't get along well, and they're very different kind of people.
Sure.
But it gave the feeling that they, you know, that they never had mended fences, and or that Pete or that Johnny was still, you know, whatever. And now, but the comments that he made after Pete passed, I mean, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. So either, and this may just be the way I read it. I'm not saying I'm right. Or, all these things for all these years where it seemed like Johnny still was pissed at Pete for whatever reason. I was misreading. And Johnny had a soft spot in his heart for Pete as one of his, as I would think, you know, you're the 8 greatest ball players ever be on the field at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that he said about Pete were outstanding this week. So
yeah.
it just seemed like he flipped. And maybe not. It's maybe just the way I'm viewing it.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I know he signed off his last tweet that I read said that we were teammates, business partners, and more importantly, in spite of what everyone thought, we were friends. I will miss him dearly.
And I took some of it as I think Johnny just, you know, as he mentioned, I think he mentioned it in the Dan Patrick interview, is that, you know, the first thing he gets asked is, should Pete be in the Hall of Fame? Every time. It's never about him. And, you know, if for the billionth time having to listen to that question, I could see where it could get annoying.
Yeah.
When you're the greatest catcher to ever play baseball.
When you're the greatest catcher of all time,
Yep.
and every interview starts off about Pete Rose. And not that he's jealous of Pete Rose, it's just like, there's plenty out there on this already. Why bother with it? You know.
Well, let's get into it, Branch. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame?
Gosh, that's hard.
Not for me.
The only reason I say it's hard is because there's only one rule. But I believe he should be, because it's, as time is moving on, it's not even well, I mean, it depends on if you're talking about the Hall of Fame or the Hall of pretty good and never made Major League Baseball mad about anything. Because the way they're gatekeeping the Hall of Fame from other players as well now, it's frustrating. Yes, he should be in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the greatest baseball players of all time. There you go.
Yeah, my favorite line of thinking on that was the Hall of Fame is a museum. And how in the hell can you tell the story of Major League Baseball without mentioning Peter Edward Rose? I've always said, if you want to, instead of a plaque with his face on it without a bust, just get like the poop emoji. Just say, Pete Rose,
I say just a little bit
he
more?
was a turd. Please?
Yeah. Would I have loved for Pete to get into the Hall of Fame after there was an apology? True, you know, things had worked out and we'd put the gambling behind them and he got in. Gosh, it's hard. I wanted him to go in living after that him and Major League Baseball come to terms, you know, with who he is and everything else. And it never happened. And now I'm actually, in a way, not looking forward to if he does get in posthumously, he deserves to be there, but I'm not for sure that ceremony is going to be fun.
Yeah, I've heard some speculation that his family could refuse. I don't know how that would work.
Sad. It might be sad. And I want to remember Pete for what I remember him as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old child.
Yeah.
That's Pete to me now. And to hell with the rest of it. It can all just go away.
Life's too short, as Pete can tell you. Well, Bill, you got anything else you want to say on the Pete before we move on?
No, it's just like I said. I've always felt that the Hall of Fame, Pete should have went in as a player. And if you want to notate the rest of the stuff, I have no problem with that. The difference between Pete and the guys the steroid guys and all that thing is they aren't barred from getting in. They just aren't getting the votes.
Mm-hmm.
If they'd be allowed to vote on Pete, Pete would have already been in. I firmly believe that. He'd have been a first ballot, I believe. Now, no way proven one way or the other. But Pete not being in the Hall of Fame, he has nobody to blame for that but himself, I believe. Again, he was, his own worst enemy, as you said, Nate. But I don't think the Hall of Fame has, I won't say any value, but it sure decreases or devalues the Hall of Fame when you don't have Pete Rose in it. And it shows the hypocrisy of baseball when they have no problem rolling him out for their all-century team. And letting him make appearances with the Reds, when it suits them, but when they can honor him, they don't do it.
Yeah. Well, to put a bow on this thing, if anybody if you have a few extra minutes, head on over to theringer.com. There's a great article by Ben Lindbergh. He kind of touches on a lot what we talked about, just the generational relevance for Pete Rose and how when you became aware of him at what age really affects your opinion of him. And, he was a Red. Some would argue that he was the quintessential Red. Is that a good thing? Well, feel free to debate that amongst yourselves all you want, folks. But you can hate the artist, but that does not mean you have to hate all the art.
You can make the argument that there are very few years that Pete Rose was even the best player on the Reds.
Oh, for sure.
Means, he went from playing with Frank Robinson and Vada Pinson, and then Johnny Bench, and then Joe Morgan. Mm-hmm. So, you can make the argument that for most of his career, he wasn't even the best player on his own team.
He played with some pretty good dudes, and that must have been fun to watch.
Yep.
All right. R.I.P. Peter Edward Rose. Let's move on to this manager search. Did y'all know that the Reds no longer have a manager? They are an unmanaged baseball team. And
I heard that's why your brother's not here tonight. He's in a job interview.
He's interviewing for the job. You know what? I wouldn't wish that on my own flesh and blood.
Yeah, because we'd be ragging on him every week on here.
Calling for his head. Fire Chad Dotson.
Fire Chad.
This is too good. We unfortunately don't have a ton of news since the last time we were on here. We are recording this on Wednesday this week. We had to do it today early. I guess the only real news is that they have ruled some folks out. Luke Maley got ruled out, which the fact that he was ever mentioned blows my mind. Former Red Miguel Cairo. Barry Larkin officially ruled out.
Your brother told I sent that to your brother, and he said, "I believe it when I see it." So he's still sticking with his prediction.
Yeah, fair enough. Then Joe Girardi, Joe Madden, and Scott Service were also all ruled out. Scott Service was a name I hadn't heard in a long time.
I hadn't heard Scott Service either till I read that today. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised they ruled him out, to be honest.
I couldn't tell you enough about his resume. He has not been on my radar in a long time. So I guess since there has been no real news, Branch, we haven't had your opinion on it. Who would you, if you could wave your magic wand, your Reds fan magic wand, who would be the Reds manager next year?
Or who do you think it'll be?
There's two different. That's two different people. That's a good way to put it. There's two different people.
Let's go down both roads.
If I had to wave a magic wand, and it would probably be like Will Venable. If I could say I get my choice, maybe. Well, I mean, honestly, if I get my choice, it's going to be Tito.
Yeah.
If I get my absolute dream choice, Tito. There you go. You're done. But of non-Titos, it would be Will Venable, but who I think it's going to be is Derek Ross.
David Ross.
I think they're going to offer it to Skip.
Yeah, David Ross.
I think, or David Ross, not David Ross. Sorry, but I think they're going to offer it to Skip. Skip's going to go to the Cardinals because he's a Cardinal at heart. The Cardinals are going to end up firing Marmol in a day or so. If they don't, yay, because Marmol's horrible.
I don't want him to.
I don't want him to. He's been horrible for him. But Skip's heart's going to lie there with the Cardinals and not the Reds. And I think since they're paying David Bell, they're not going to be able to pay a whole lot. And David Ross is sitting right there. And hey, David, you want to come get some payback on the Cubs?
Mm-hmm. That's why I like it for David Ross.
This Ellie guy, he's kind of good. Yeah.
Nobody's going to be more motivated.
You mentioned that in, I think, last week's podcast.
We talked last week about wondering how much they were paying Bell, and that number came out.
Yeah.
And it was a lot more than I expected.
It was higher than I would have guessed.
Me too.
They still owe him about $5 million.
Yeah, 4.9.
Which was he the third most highly paid person on the roster last year?
I don't know.
Was David Bell making more than everybody except for Jamer? I mean, they did just about as good of a job as each other, so it makes sense. Yeah, Terry Francona, if he wants the job, I would just be spamming him with pictures of Ellie and Hunter Green nonstop. Like, you can, I know it's not an ideal situation. I know we haven't had success in forever, and I know that it's touch or go whether the ownership and front office are going to support you at all. But you get to coach these two guys. You get to manage Hunter Green and Ellie De La Cruz. Yeah, David Ross. I like the fact that as a catcher, you've been the manager of the field. You know when it's the right time to have a soft touch, and you know when you can get in somebody's face. And I think that could work. Now, I don't know if he's the right guy or not. He had some up and down times with Chicago. They didn't think he was as good as Craig Counsell. So who's to say? We'll continue to speculate until we get some more news. I guess it is worth noting that Skip Shoemaker is officially no longer the manager of the Miami Marlins. They agreed to part ways. And I think Miami has since parted ways with their entire coaching staff. What a dumpster fire that is.
I think they laid off the grounds crew.
Yeah, it's bad there. All right, let's top some loose ends before we take this thing home. Matt McClain, they announced that he is playing in the Arizona Fall League.
Right on.
Going to be joining CES and Edwin Arroyo. Bill,
you think that's a good? You think that's a good idea? I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Well, if he's going to get injured right away, go to Arizona, get injured, get it over with, get it done now. You can start looking for a new second baseman. You just move on.
I think
if that back's not going to hold.
Yeah, I think it's one of those.
Better find out now in March.
If he emerges unscathed, then I think it's a great idea. Get to see live pitching and play competitive baseball after missing a full season. But if he pulls that oblique again, then it's a disaster.
If he pulls that oblique again, you can't count on him to be your second baseman next year.
No.
You're done.
And here's a word to the wise. Don't count on it anyway. Don't count on anybody ever. Get enough good players where you can withstand it. I know it's not going super hot right now, but the Braves made the playoffs. And who did they lose this year? Almost all their good players.
A whole lot of them.
If you're deep enough, you can withstand it. Who are you most excited about of that trio? And I imagine that trio of players are the ones that generate the most buzz. McClain's an easy answer, but I need to see something from CES. I was so high on that guy going into this season, and he was injured the whole time. We litigated that to death. But I want to see him back healthy, swinging the bat, showing that pop that this lineup desperately, desperately needs, that right-handed power bat. Branch, who are you excited to see?
CES, and I need the batting coaches to shut the hell up about him swinging inside the zone. When he was swinging outside the zone like crazy, he was launching everything. That boy, he's going to hit like Clemente. He can hit bad balls. Let him do it.
Pedro Guerrero.
You don't have to. If you can launch him, who cares? But sitting there looking at his ozone rating's really down. I don't know how he's doing it. I don't have to know how. I just need to know the results.
The only ozone rating I need to hear about is whether or not we'll get melanoma.
Yeah, he's hitting it. That's it.
Yeah. CES, come on, get healthy, buddy. We need you so bad. I am excited to watch Edwin Arroyo too, because I was crunching the numbers on those burn it down to the stakes trades the Reds made when they got rid of Castillo and then Winker and Suarez first. And the Reds are not winning those trades.
No.
I mean, they got great prospects back, and they could still win those trades. Noelvi Marte could be the guy that we thought he was going into 2024. Edwin Arroyo could be the prospect that we hope he is, and Brandon Williamson could get healthy. But right now, it is not good. 3 of the people involved are out of the league completely. Jesse Winker is playing in the playoffs right now. Gino Suarez has had 2 good years in a row. I need these young guys to.
Yeah, but Winker hasn't been good since he left the Reds.
Well, the first year he was gone was brutal when he was with Seattle and Milwaukee. But all year this year, he's been a pretty good ball player. He's been a couple wins above replacement for Washington, and now
he played better in Washington than he did.
Yeah, I always think he is, and this is just pure speculation. Getting traded must suck. Out of the blue, and that was out of the blue. I don't know if y'all remember when that breaking news happened. I was visiting my wife's father and stepmother for the first time, and I had to apologize. I'm like, I'm going to be on my phone a lot for the next few hours.
Yeah.
It's blowing up. They thought I was the rudest. But, yeah, Winker had a rough year. But he bounced back and was kind of the same player that we knew and loved in Cincinnati for 2024. So we'll see. He's a bit of a front runner, as friend Carlos Guevara would say. He don't mind chirping at Willie Adames, which I appreciate. All right, what else we got? Nick Martinez was named National League Pitcher of the Month. Our boy Nick threw 32 2/3 innings with an ERA of 0. It's pretty good when it starts with 0. 0.83. A 0.674 whip. 30 strikeouts, and he held opponents to a 161 batting average in September. I know you're not always getting the other team's best in September, but that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is he's got that player option, that mutual option. Bill, let's start with you.
Next year.
Do you think there is?
I don't
any
know if
scenario?
he's married, but I'm sure his wife has some houses picked out already in different cities.
That's who we need to be lobbying. We got to
It's
find
his
out
wife.
Martinez's wife and be like, "You love it here.
You're gonna love it here. It's great."
Can we crowdsource a house for him?
Yeah.
Penthouse downtown. Johnny Bench used to live there. There's carpet on the roof. We can do it.
Well, I think I've seen something where in order for the Reds to just show they really want him, as soon as he selects free agency, go, okay, here's qualifying offer right now. And just give him the qualifying offer, and that's kind of your starting point for negotiations.
Mm-hmm. And if he says no, you get that draft pick, I guess. I think he's a really good ball player, and he loves the 1 year deal with the player option. That's the one kind of deal he signed since coming back from Japan or Korea. I think it was Korea, but it could have been Japan. I might be getting lost in the Shin-Soo Choo retirement news. Shout out to Shin-Soo Choo. Yeah. But I would love to see
one of the greatest 1 year Reds of all time.
100%. Absolutely. I still have a Shin-Soo Choo jersey. Played 1 year.
Heck yeah.
Choo and Ron Gant. Ron Gant, and Mike Cameron.
Yeah.
Gosh, it was so much fun having him there.
So just great. Man, he was fun.
Joey loved him.
Yeah.
Rez, do whatever it takes. Get Martinez.
First pitch homers were just fantastic.
That's beautiful.
Do you think there's any chance Martinez is here next year?
No.
I'm going to say yes, but it's not a very high chance. There's a scenario. I mean, he didn't command much in the open market last year. So maybe they can get him on another 1 or 2 year with the player option afterwards. But he's not getting younger. He's not a young guy. He's in his mid-30s already, right?
Yeah.
So he might whoever gives him those 3 guaranteed years might get it done. Is that going to be the Reds? Well,
Yeah, you have to believe this is his
No.
last chance at a multi-year deal.
Yeah.
yeah.
He's not
All
going to
right,
get three
so, speaking
figures.
of pitchers-
He's going to get close.
He was 33. Excuse me, he was 33 this year.
Yeah.
And he went from a 123 ERA plus to a 142 ERA plus. He's gotten better the last 3 years.
Yeah.
He's figured it out. I just think he's such a valuable guy to have with the different roles he can fill.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
Well, speaking of pitchers, there was some interesting news, if you can call it news. The Reds are expected to pursue a Sonny Gray trade. The Cardinals are trying to get off that salary. Now, important to note here is that he signed a 3-year and $75 million deal, but it was backloaded, and the Cardinals only paid $10 million up front. So whoever takes that on is on the hook for 2 years at $30 million each and a $5 million buyout. So still $65 million left on that deal.
And
My question is,
the third year is $30 million,
which is just ridiculous.
So
I mean, it's also the going rate for great pitchers.
Here's my first question, though: who says the Reds are going to pursue him?
This is what I want to know. Bob Nightingale tweeted out the Reds are expected to aggressively pursue. Says who?
Right.
He didn't mention a source. It's not come from anybody in the organization.
Right.
It's just come from one guy with terrible hair on Twitter.
Does anybody on here believe that the Reds are going to commit $60 million to a 35-year-old pitcher?
There's a scenario where I think Bob, in his advanced state, could be like, "Oh yeah, they love him. We should do it. PR move." But we don't think Bob's really calling the shots anymore, and I can't imagine with brother Phil wanting to tap into his, secret stash money. Sign a guy like Sonny Gray. I would love. I guess if Sonny Gray is a Red next year, don't get me wrong, I'll be fired up. I loved having him in Cincinnati. Yeah. I think he's a very good pitcher. That price tag, it's not my money, so I guess I really shouldn't care. But if I can assume that the Reds are only going to spend X amount of dollars in this offseason, putting $30 million a year on Sonny Gray's contract he's not in his prime anymore. Let's just say that. Doesn't seem like the most prudent.
He threw 166 innings this year, 184 last year, and 119 the year before that, and 135 the last year he was here.
He's never been a picture of health, but that 161 would have led the Reds, I believe. Now, he still had like a 3.6 or a 3.8 or something, so he wasn't quite as good as he has been, but yeah, we'll see. The last kind of big news I guess we need to talk about, even though I don't have a ton to say, because it's that Charlie Day meme of Pepe Silvia when he's trying to got everything up on the whiteboard and strings pointing to it and all the evidence, trying to figure out what's going on in the mailroom, is that the Diamond Sports Group is potentially maybe cutting ties with the Reds and several other ball clubs. That is the company that owns Bally Sports Ohio and a lot of other Bally Sportses. This has been sort of a thing for over a year now, and we've been waiting to see how it plays out. It's like trying to figure out who owns the Cincinnati Reds. There's too many hands in the coffers. I don't know what's going on. All I know is that if it ends blackouts for baseball fans and lets us watch the stinking games, then I'm all for it. That's all. That's my only opinion.
That's my same. It's probably gonna be a lot of pain to get there. I don't care about how they make the sausage. Just get to no more blackouts at the end of it, and I'm good.
Yes,
I'll pay what I have to pay.
The little bit that I've read on this sounds to me like they had the opportunity to cancel the Reds contract, and maybe they'll come back and renegotiate for a lower amount of money, which again will reflect on how much they're willing to spend in the offseason. But who the hell knows?
Who knows? If we get any relevant information, we'll certainly pass it along on this podcast. But until then, that's pure speculation. When all that's fun, we're approaching the hour mark, and we shouldn't do it now. All right, quick playoff chatter. What are some of your all's thoughts on the playoffs so far? I have enjoyed seeing guys like Winker making a difference. Hit that big home run in the play-in game, I guess if you want to call it that, the playoff for the last seed against the Braves. Talking some smack to Willie Adames yesterday. What's that, Bill?
Can't root for New York teams. I cannot root for New York. Cannot and will not root for New York teams.
I don't have a problem rooting for the Mets. They've had a pretty rough go of it.
I enjoyed watching the Astros go down today.
Astros went down.
That young Detroit team, but it's probably more just watching the Astros go down. But it being done by that young Detroit team that heck they were selling off at the trade deadline, and they were done. They wheeled themselves into.
We talked about it last week.
Yeah,
I eventually sent the graphic over to Bill. They're like percentage chances of making the playoffs from August through September was just wild. And here they are. They swept the Astros. A little bittersweet, I guess. The Royals, who are probably my favorite team in the AL, I think that's who I want to make a run because they line up the most similarly to the Reds, in my opinion, with market size. And, they started the rebuild a couple of years after the Reds. The Reds have been rebuilding for longer than the Royals. And they just knocked the Orioles out of the playoffs. Some guy named Kaiser Soze on Twitter wouldn't stop telling me how wanting to emulate the Royals was stupid and that I should be a Yankees fan. So shout out to that guy. With the Royals advance, it's bittersweet though because, and you're right, Bill, watching Bobby Witt Jr. play baseball is an absolute joy. And you should all turn on the TV when we watched what he did to Cincinnati when we thought the Reds had a chance coming out the gates. What's that, Bill?
How can anybody be faster than Ellie going home to first?
I'm just going to say it. How can a white guy be faster than Ellie?
He is.
He is so fast.
I wasn't going to say that, even though my wife did say that at dinner tonight.
He's a freak. Bobby Witt Jr. is so stinking good.
When anybody runs that fast is a freak. I mean,
yeah.
And that's a good baseball name. I watched the first several innings of it, and Michael King was
nasty.
Pushing.
Oh.
That's the first time I sat there and really watched him.
Yeah, me too. And I'm sitting there watching it going, this dude is filthy.
My biggest takeaway is that number one on my bucket list of stadiums to go to is Petco. I got to get to San Diego for a playoff game. That is the most electric atmosphere I have seen in a long, long time. And for it to be happening,
last night during the game, they were talking about Kevin Brown. Last night during the game, they were talking about Kevin Brown when he had that 16 strikeouts. I was at that game because I was stationed out there, and I was like 4 or 5 rows from the very top of the Murph, on like $5 tickets. But the Murph was rather large. You could fit a lot of people in there during that game. But it was pretty awesome to kind of squint and see it from a very long distance away from the field live. They were talking about last night, like, man. And my wife's like, you remember being there? I'm like, this guy's putting on that kind of performance. She's like, we were at that game, weren't we? I'm like, yeah, we were. Back in '98.
Well, just a friendly reminder that RIP to their recently passed owner, is it Seidler?
Yep.
And he made it his mission before he passed. He's like, we're going to spend this money. And he started the process 2 seasons ago, and it's not paying off until now, really. But he's like, we'll be fine. We'll make it. And he's going to try to put a winner out in the field. So please listen, Phil, Bob, whoever's doing it. If you build it, they will come. Because that atmosphere is ridiculous. All right, a couple quick rapid-fire viewer mail questions before we call this thing. First one, these, as always, come from our friends at patreon.com/riverfrontcincy, which is where I met Brother Branch. You, too, can meet Branch for as little as $2 a month. All right, first question comes from Kyle Kaplan. Does anyone actually believe this team will do anything significant this offseason? I'm literally starting to hate them now, honestly. Kyle, going hard in the paint, but I hear you. Yeah, I think they'll do something significant. I think they'll sign a manager. But that's it. That's probably it. That's all. That's the only thing I'm going to allow myself to expect. If you have no expectations, it's like Vince Vaughn in dodgeball. If you have no expectations, you never get let down. It's pretty easy. Gentlemen? Branch, what do you think?
Oh, I think they'll sign 2 more infielders.
Stop.
Can't have enough.
You're right. Bill, the Reds going to make any meaningful moves?
Nothing that moves. Same as last winter. Nothing that moves the needle. They won't make a big move. They won't make anything that'll make the prognosticators think that they're going to be they'll challenge next year.
Yeah, I think Nick Kroll coming out and saying right off the bat that we're a small market team. We're going to operate like one. Meanwhile, the Padres have Manny Machado and they signed Yu Darvish. They got Drake. It's possible. You can do it. You can do both. But please sign Anthony Santander and prove me wrong. All right. Joey Gaditza says, who do you folks think will be the next skipper? We have covered that. Is going to be Chad Dotson.
Yeah.
And then our last question from Dwight Kelly says, which players impressed you this season? I was impressed by Nick Martinez down the stretch. 100% agree on Martinez. I think for me, the biggest shout out I want to give is to Tyler Stevenson. I know we talked about it a good bit here, and we expected big things from him, but there was a point earlier in the year when Chad and I had to say it out loud that we are officially worried about Tyler. You can go back and look at some of the minor league numbers like, oh, maybe that lofty expectations we set on him weren't quite as justified as we thought. And then he came out there and he did it all year. He was a plus defender and a plus offensive catcher, arguably a top 3 offensive catcher in the National League. So shout out to Tyler Stevenson. Lock him up. Extend that guy. Branch, who you got?
Hunter Green. I was worried he was always going to be what he had been and not turn into the ace that we all hoped he could be. He turned into the ace we hoped he could be.
Turned into the ace.
You know.
He was great. Bill, anybody you want to?
The guy, I mean, it's easy to say Tyler Stevenson. It's easy to say Ellie. It's easy to say Hunter. Guy that to me is just there every time he pitches is Abbott. I really like him a lot. I really think. I know that he may never make an all-star team, even though I wouldn't be surprised if he made 1 or 2. But he's a guy that unless he's hurt, he takes the ball and he gives you good innings and keeps you in a ball game.
Yeah. A couple of people I'll shout out. Just he tailed off quite a bit at the end of the season, but I appreciate what Santonio Espinal. I just went blank. 7% beer got me. Espinal. What Espinal did. I appreciate his versatility. He's not going to win you a World Series, but I like having the guys like that on the team as your last man. And then Buck Farmer. They kept him out. He was used perfectly well. He got a lot of innings, but never meaningful ones. And he took the ball every time they asked him to. And he was pretty good. Now, it's easy to be better when you're not pitching those high leverage innings, but you have to have those guys that'll do it and not complain about it. So if they bring him back in that exact same role, I'll be okay with that.
A guy you can say the same thing about is Mole.
All right, Bill. I always love Sam Mole.
Yep.
I'm glad the Reds didn't do nothing when they were in first place in the deadline in 2023. I wish they'd have done more, but I like the one thing they did.
They did next to nothing, but they didn't do nothing.
The one thing they did was pretty good. Any parting words for the folks out there?
R.I.P. Pete Rose.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Pete. I haven't told my mom yet. She's in a home right now and in a rehab facility. Not going to be easy. I'm basically trying to build the courage to it. And I'm not looking forward to it. And she's going to be devastated. Wow. Rest in peace, Pete.
Don't push that. People keep that in mind when it's easy to, have your opinions online. This a lot of people, good and bad, influence people in a lot of different ways. And I think that we are all mature enough to have nuanced conversations with each other and realize that it's not a black and white world there. It's mostly gray. And be respectful, and you never know how much time you have. So hug them tight and go Reds. So that's going to do it for us at the Riverfront, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate y'all talking through this with me. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, and thank you to our Patreon family. Couldn't do this without you, and that's going to do it. Shout out to Lisa Alberto Bonilla. Shouts out to Wayne Cranchicki and Eli Cash. Shout out to my patron saint Adam Dunn, for Shinsu Chu and Peter Edward Rose. This is Nate Dotson, Bill Lack, and Branch Brown saying, so long, Cincinnati.